Part 1. The Boy with Empty Eyes. It takes only a single glance into Egon Schiele's portraits to realize he was searching for more than beauty. The faces stare back with unsettling intensity, hollow yet alive, fractured yet vivid. In a dim Vienna studio, as the winter wind hissed through slatted shutters, Schiele collapsed over his easel. A brush dripped black paint onto the floor. He had painted one final self-portrait, but the man in the painting was not him. The eyes belonged to a stranger. This is not the tale of a master craftsman. It's the story of an obsession, a hunger for raw truth in a world suffocating in etiquette. From childhood scars to moral scandal, from explosive genius to untimely death at 31, Schiele dared to expose the flesh, the soul, and the void. Part 2. The door creaked open. A tall figure entered Egon's modest studio. His mentor, Gustav Klimt, cloaked in a long olive robe, looking like a ghost from another world. "Your lines have teeth now," Klimt murmured, scanning the canvas. "But they bite your own heart." Egon didn't answer. He merely stared at the unfinished portrait of Wally, her eyes half-formed but already more alive than anything he'd painted. Her body, naked and contorted in a vulnerable, angular pose, seemed to judge them both. Klimt sat down, exhaling. "They will never understand your truth." "They don't need to," Egon snapped. "It's not for them." Silence settled. Outside, the wind slapped Vienna's crumbling windows. Inside, Egon's fingers trembled. Not from cold but from the strain of containing too much. Gustav leaned closer. "But Wally, she does understand, doesn't she?" That was the problem. Because she understood too much. The scandal came like a storm, sudden, violent, merciless. Parents in Nullenbach accused him of corrupting their daughters. Local officials paraded his sketches through courtrooms as if they were weapons. Nude children, distorted bodies, defiant eroticism, proof of madness, they said. He was arrested. In the cell, the only light came from a sliver of window. Egon paced like a caged animal. No paint, no charcoal, only walls to scream at. He began drawing with his fingernail on the floor, ghostly lines, vanishing as he made them. "I am not obscene," he whispered to himself again and again. He was sentenced for exhibiting erotic art in a place accessible to children. They burned one of his drawings. Burned it, like witches, like heretics. Even Klimt could not protect him. When Egon returned home, Wally stood in the doorway. Her eyes were dark wells of patience and pain. "They humiliated you," she said quietly. He nodded. "They will do it again." He looked away. "I'm still painting." "Yes," she said. "But not with me." The silence between them cracked like glass. "You want to go?" he asked. "I have to," she said, crying without tears. "You said I was your mirror. But you only see yourself." She left that night. Egon watched her disappear down the fog-drenched alley. He didn't run after her. He painted her the next morning, from memory. It was the most violent thing he ever did with a brush. He married Edith Harms, a respectable girl from across the street. Her twin sister stood silently in every corner like a shadow. The war came. Egon was drafted. At the military camp, he sketched the corpses of young men, recording their agony like a morbid priest. He painted soldiers rotting from within, women waiting like statues, children staring into nothing. His colors bled like infected wounds. His figures twisted like they were screaming in a vacuum. When the Spanish flu arrived, Vienna was already a morgue disguised as a city. Klimt died first. Then Egon's wife, Edith, pregnant with their first child. 3 days later, Egon Schiele picked up his pencil one last time. He drew her, not as she had been but as she was in his mind, peaceful, unreachable, floating somewhere beyond the disease. Then his fever took him too. He was 28. But the story did not end there. Years later, when the Nazis tried to erase degenerate artists from history, Egon's work re-emerged, sharper, angrier, more relevant than ever. His portraits haunted galleries. His women refused to be shamed. His distorted lines became holy relics for broken souls. Some say he foresaw the sickness of the 20th century: war, control, censorship, alienation. Some say he birthed it. All we know is this: Egon Schiele died screaming truth, and truth, like his art, does not age. It simply waits. Part 3. The rain had finally stopped. The smell of wet stone and soot clung to Vienna's alleys as Egon emerged from his studio, his coat too thin for the lingering chill. His steps were measured, but his mind raced. The letter crumpled in his pocket like a live wire. It was from Gustav Klimt. "Come at once. Something urgent." Klimt's scrawl was uncharacteristically erratic. Egon didn't wait for a carriage. He walked even as the wind sliced against his jaw like razors. When he reached Klimt's studio, he found him alone, sitting beneath a large unfinished canvas, a golden woman with eyes like knives. "Egon," Klimt said without greeting, "they're watching you." Egon froze. "What?" "The authorities. They've seen your recent works. The nudes. The children. The truth." Egon's chest tightened. "I show what I see. They don't want to see. Not that. Not now." Klimt stood and placed a hand on Egon's shoulder. "You are too raw. Too early. Too much." Egon pulled away, anger rising. "Too honest, you mean?" But he knew Klimt was right. The following week 2 officers came to his door. They took everything. His sketchbooks, canvases, private letters. Even his bedsheets, for evidence, they said. They arrested him on charges of immorality and abduction, twisting a situation with a young model into a narrative of seduction and perversion. The courtroom reeked of cold wood and colder stares. Mothers clutched their daughters. The prosecutor called him a disease of the moral soul. His paintings were displayed like corpses at a trial. "This," the man spat, pointing to girl with black hair, "this is filth." Egon stood defiant. "That girl is real. She exists. And she is not ashamed." They burned one of his drawings, in the courtroom in front of everyone, to set an example. But they could not burn his name. He was sentenced to 24 days in prison. He served 21. Behind bars he painted on anything he could find. The walls, scraps of paper, the lining of his coat. Other prisoners mocked him until they saw the eyes he could paint, and then they gave him silence. When he emerged he was thinner, paler, but his stare had sharpened into a blade. He had tasted shame. And spat it out. Back in the city the whispers grew louder, but so did the admiration. His exhibitions, though controversial, drew crowds. Foreign collectors offered to buy. Even Paris took note. A gallery in Berlin displayed his works next to Munch and Toulouse-Lautrec. But Egon, he wasn't chasing fame. He was chasing something darker. A way to exorcise the trembling that gripped his spine at night. The visions. The face of Wally still echoing like a phantom. He refused to write to her, though he carried a tiny portrait of her in his pocket like a talisman. Then came Edith. A quiet girl. From a respectable family. She wore white lace and looked at him like he was a storm she wished to step into. He married her in the spring of 1915. But something in him cracked. As the bells rang for war. Part 4. The city of Vienna faded behind them as Egon and Wally stepped onto the night train bound for Český Krumlov, a quiet town wrapped in medieval fog and distant whispers. Egon had accepted a last-minute invitation to stay at the old Rosenberg estate, a crumbling castle-turned-artist's retreat funded by a reclusive baron who claimed to be a patron of decadent genius. Wally stared out the window. The blur of trees flickering past mirrored her unease. Egon was deep in his sketchbook, drawing strangers from the compartment without lifting his eyes. An elderly priest, a woman with a child, a soldier, reduced to line and shadow. Wally said nothing. She recognized the trance. It was the only religion Egon still believed in. When they arrived, the castle was as cold and disoriented as a dream. Thick tapestries clung to walls. The halls echoed too loudly. Servants moved like sleepwalkers. The baron himself, Herr von Leben, greeted them with thin smiles and candlelit eyes. He insisted they dine by moonlight and spoke in cryptic admiration. "You draw death," he said to Egon. "But you trick us into seeing beauty in her face." Egon smiled, eyes half-lidded. "I only draw what's already there." Wally barely ate. She hated the castle. Its corridors, its dust, the way Egon had become more and more distant since the success of his gallery show. But worse, she hated the feeling that she was being replaced. Not by another woman but by his need for something darker. Something eternal. That night Egon began his most feverish work. His room filled with sketches of distorted saints, hollow-cheeked lovers, and androgynous angels with cracked halos. He barely slept. Wally posed in silence, her limbs aching. But she could feel it, the desperation in his hands. The hunger. "You're not painting me," she whispered one evening. "You're painting her." "Who?" "The woman who comes after me." Egon said nothing. Wally left him a week later. She didn't announce it. She packed while he was asleep, left a note wedged under the leg of his easel. Read. "I gave you my body. You gave me ghosts." He didn't chase her. When she returned to Vienna alone, people whispered that she had lost something far more than a lover. Egon did not stop drawing. He burned through canvases, paper, even the backs of receipts and letters. Everything became material. His work grew darker, bolder. He painted the illness in his bones, the guilt in his sex, the visions that crept behind his eyes at night. The Baron called it divine. In truth, Egon had begun to see death not as a metaphor, but as a mistress. Then came the letter from Edith. It arrived in spring, wrapped in violet paper. It smelled faintly of perfume and pressed flowers. I have dreamed of your hand since we last met. I'm not Wally. I will not pose. But I will wait. Egon didn't hesitate. He returned to Vienna at once. Edith was the daughter of a respected bourgeois family, refined, clean, with a delicate beauty and a hint of sadness in her voice. She knew Egon's scandal. She had seen the courtroom reports, the accusations of immorality, the banishment from her parents' circle. And yet, she asked to see the sketchbooks. When she did, she turned every page slowly. Without speaking. That night she kissed him. They married in secret, a modest ceremony with only 2 witnesses. Wally did not attend. Egon sent no word. Their marriage was a strange one, more civilized than what he had with Wally but less fiery. Edith tried to give him stability. He tried to give her a version of himself that wasn't haunted. It didn't last. The war had begun. And soon Egon was conscripted. The winter of 1918 crept in with the chill of death, a harbinger of more than just seasonal change. The Spanish flu, dark angel of Europe, swept through Vienna like a scythe. Schiele watched helplessly as Edith, frail and pregnant, succumbed in days. She lay pale in their bed, her hand clutched in his, and whispered her final words, "Draw the light for me." 3 days later, Schiele followed her. The last days were feverish, not just from the illness, but from a wild, frantic attempt to cheat time. Even as his limbs weakened, his hands trembled, he drew. Edith's ghost lived in every sketch, every charcoal trace. He filled pages as though they could absorb his grief, as if through ink he could carve her back into the world. In one of the final drawings, unfinished, lines trailing into white nothing, her eyes stare forward, wide, eternal. On October 31st, Egon Schiele died. 28 years old. But death for him was not silence. It was resonance. His works, once spat on and hidden away, emerged in a post-war world gasping for authenticity. The distorted limbs, the raw nakedness, the spiritual claustrophobia of his nudes, all began to pulse again, like veins rediscovering blood. Gustav Klimt had once said of Egon, "This boy will go far." He did. Just not in time.